Hi, and welcome to the Codefresh 101 series. In this video, we will explore the CI side of Codefresh and see how you can create your first full CI pipeline. So, in this video, we will look at how the UI is organized. Then we will create a project, and we will add a pipeline in that project. We'll add a trigger to that pipeline, and we'll add a few basic steps so you can, build your application. Then we'll see how to put some steps in parallel. We will have a look to our awesome features, the debugger. Finally, we'll add some condition on a step, and we'll see how to send some Slack notification when your pipeline fails. First, let's have a look to the UI. So the UI is divided in three different main sections. So in the center, you have the section where you will see, most of the information you're looking for, your project, your pipeline, if you're using GitOps, your application. On the left side is a main navigation bar. As you can see, it's split into different sections. On the top, you have, starting from the left, the quick search. It allows you to search for anything that you want. So if you're looking for a specific pipeline, or if you're looking for some documentation, you can see and reach out very quickly. It's really convenient. And on Mac, you can use the Command K as a shortcut to reach that window. Then if we continue to the right, we have the setting button that allows you to access to the setting for your account. It's only available if you're an admin for that account. Then the bell here shows you what's new with Codefresh. It could be a security notice, release notice, a new feature, and so on. So have a look on a regular basis. Finally, on the top right, you have access to the different accounts you're part of. You may be part of your company account, and you may also have a private account. The Git personal access token are for the GitHub side of the house. We won't cover that today. But here you have the user setting. It allows you to set some variables for your own account. So if you want to receive notification, the date and time format, very important if you're, in the US or in the rest of the world, I like 24 hours. You can disable the welcome screen that we were just looking at. If you want to receive update, if you want to allow the support team to access your account to debug a problem. And you can also create some keys to access Codefresh remotely, either through the CLI or the API. So let's go back to the home dashboard. Here you can see some overview for your main application if you're using GitHub, the ones that are deploy the most and the success rate and stuff. And if you scroll down, you can also see some metrics about your most common pipeline in terms of the number of execution and the duration and so on. And of course, you can filter as you need. We also have DORA metrics. DORA is an industry standard to assess how well you're doing in terms of DevOps. It's basically 4 different metrics. How often do you deploy? How good you are deploying, how often you fail. And when you fail, how long does it take you to restore to a good situation? And how long does it take to go from a commit to development in production? And again, here you can filter, through different, setting, either by application or by your cluster and so on. Let's create our first project. So if you click on the left on project, you will see a list of the projects you eventually have. You can filter through your favorite one, and you can also add some filter on tags. We'll see that in a second. And of course, you can search for a specific name. And as you can see, the search is case insensitive. On the right here, you have additional action to delete a project or to add annotation. Annotation are basically metadata, a key value pair you can attach to different objects in Codefresh, including projects. So let's create a new project. So the first thing I'm going to give it is a name. So Codefresh 101. Then I can add some tags. The tags are used for two specific cases. The first one is filtering, as we've seen in the previous screen, but they also use, I think more importantly, for permission. The permission system in Codefresh is what we called ABAC, Attribute-Based Access Control. And the attribute is a tag or a series of tags. So by adding tags to project and pipeline and other objects in Codefresh, you can then add rules that give specific permission like delete, create, read, for some specific team on specific objects. That's how you set permission in Codefresh. So let's add a couple of tags. So let's say training, for example. And I think I have one called demo already created. So let's create those. And then I can add an icon to see a little better in the list, if it makes sense. So let's now create a project. And my project, of course, is now empty. But if we go back to the setting, I can change my tags and the name and my icon as well. We also have the ability to add variable to a project. The advantage to add variables to a project versus to the pipeline is those variables will be shared across all the pipeline in that project. So that's maybe very convenient to give some unity to the different pipeline in your project. Let's now create our first pipeline. So let's click on new pipeline. So the first thing you can select is a template. A template are basically pre-created pipeline that are at your disposal to start from something already existing that may follow your company's standard or just to make your life easier. So in this case, we're going to create a brand new pipeline. We're going to give it a name. And I'm going to associate it to a repository so I can create triggers. Basically, every time some code is modified, I will automatically start my pipeline. So here I'm selecting an integration. We'll look at that in a few minutes. That's basically my credential to access any kind of third-party tool. So in this case, GitHub. Then I'm going to select my organization, and then I'm going to select the repository where my example is this one. Okay, and then the same than my project, I can add tag for my pipeline. So let's add 2 different tags and then click on create. Okay, as you can see, despite the fact that I didn't pick a template, Codefresh gives me kind of a 3-step basic pipeline. It gives you an idea of the syntax. So let's have a look to it. So the pound is commit. As you can see, the syntax is YAML, so the pound sign is a traditional YAML comment. Very important, the version here is compulsory, so 1.0. Then you can define some stages. The stages are really there to show during execution different columns to make it a little easier to see what's happening. And then you have a series of steps. So all the steps are basically built the same way. You have the name of the step and then some different fields. Some of the fields are common to all the steps, like the title, the description, the type. So the type can be used to either use an existing step provided by Codefresh. So in this case, a git clone. And then based on the type of step, you will have specific field related to that type. And of course, they will be different from the different type of step. And then we have what we call freestyle. Basically, in this case, it's mean bring your own image. So in this case, Ubuntu, and then run any command you can based on that image. So that's the way the Codefresh pipeline are organized. Each step is running on a Docker image, and that image can be either a public one or your own, or some pre-canned that are provided by Codefresh. But everything is going to run into a Docker image. And those images can be, and the pipeline execution is going to happen either depending on your licensing, either on our SaaS environment, and then you can choose a size, or if you prefer to run in your own environment, you can run in what we call a runtime environment, basically on your cluster, and then you can run your pipeline there. It's basically the same. It depends on what is your preference. And then you have a couple of additional options for your pipeline. Let's change what I have. Like the concurrency you want. So maybe you want to restrict your pipeline to have only one execution at a time. And then what to do when you have a pending approval, what to do in terms of a restart, do you allow restart, and so on. So you have a few additional options. So let's go back to our pipeline or workflow, the code itself. The other thing is we have a lint type of thing that basically shows me when there is error. Looks like here I'm missing a field for my build step, and we'll figure that in a few minutes. On the left, you will see if you have multiple pipeline, all of them for your project. And like for the project here, you have the ellipses that give you additional option and action for your pipeline. So annotation, remember the metadata I was, talking about. Trigger and variable that we'll also find on the right side. The settings we found there. The list of build, obviously we don't have any yet as we haven't run it. If you want to delete your pipeline. And also if you want to create a template from that specific pipeline. Let's now explore the pipeline triggers. So Codefresh support multiple kind of trigger. Git trigger, basically the idea is when something is modified in your repository to start a build, start a pipeline. But you can also start a pipeline on specific schedule, like every Sunday morning. You can start a pipeline when a new Docker image, for example, has been published, and also when a new chart has been created. So let's look at the one that was automatically created for me when I created my pipeline. So if I click on the pen here, I can open it. So the first thing you can do is give a name to your trigger, and that will be useful if you want to reference to it later. So in this case, we're going to do a push for the vote service. And then you can select, the repository has been already selected, and then you can select different type of action for your pipeline to be started, like, when a tag was pushed, when a release was created, when just a normal commit happened. So that's what we're going to use for that particular example. And then you can filter on a different thing like branches. So maybe you want to start your pipeline only when you're on a feature branch or when you're on main, or anything. Or when you have a specific expression in your pull request comment, and so on. So in our case, we just want to use a specific subfolder when code in a subfolder has been changed. So the syntax is the name of the subfolder and the double star for recursive. So let's go look at our repository. So here's the repository I was using, and in that repository I have 3 different microservices that I want to create based on each subfolder, so vote and result and worker. So now if I come look at my code, as you can see here, I have a vote subfolder, and in it, I have some code, and I have also a Docker file that we'll use as a base to create our image. And the same is true into the worker and the result subfolder. So as here I want to build the vote service when something has been modified into the vote. So let's go look at the advanced option. So as my pipeline is going to be called automatically, I want a way to identify what service I'm building. So here I know I am in the vote subfolder. So I'm going to create a variable called service, and I'm going to give it the value vote because that's what I want to create. And we had additional option we'll skip for today, but regarding caching and what environment to run and so on, and service account if you use AWS and so on. So basically here I created a trigger on a push when I modified something into the vote subfolder, and the idea is to create the vote microservice. Okay. So now let's do the same for the result subfolder. So I'm going to create a git trigger. I'm going to call it push result. My integration is the same, and I'll show you after that what it means exactly. And then I'm going to choose my organization, and again choose the same repository. But as you can see, I could pick any repository, so that's make it very easy to have a single pipeline that is used to create different microservices in that particular example, coming from different location. So here still I'm going to use a push. I don't really care about the branch and the PR and stuff like that for this, but here I want to do the result subfolder. So the syntax is the same. And then again, I need to change my variable service, and it's going to be result. And we are going to save it. Obviously, you would do the same for worker as well, but for the sake of time, we'll skip that. So as I mentioned, I was using the GitHub integration. So the integration are part of the setting. And again, you need to be an admin to have access. So if you're not, your admin should have some documentation somewhere to tell you, what to use, or maybe it's part of a template they've provided for you. But if you come to this pipeline integration, we have out of the box, multiple integration with, Git and Docker registries that we look in today's example. So if I go look at my Git one, so you can connect to multiple Git server, Bitbucket, Git, GitLab, GitHub. So here I'm using GitHub, and that's a name that's going to be used in my pipeline, and I can edit it. I can add some tag as well for permission. And here I have entered a token to access Git remotely. So, and the same can be done for my Docker registry. So I have different Docker integration and ECR and QA and so on. And the idea is the same. I'm entering a username and password, a username and API key, or depending on the different tools you want to use. So let's explore 3 basic steps provided by Codefresh to make your life easier. The first one is a Git clone. The second is build, to build a container image. And the third one is push, to push that image you created to your registry. So let's look at the clone step. So the type is git clone, and one of the arguments you have to pass is the name of the repository. But here, as you can see, the repository is hard-coded, which in no particular example would work because my 2 services I'm building are part of the same repository. But if it were not the case, then that would become a problem. So Codefresh provide some variables out of the box that you can use instead of hard coding that. And those 2 variables are CF repo owner and CF repo name that will come instead of those hard-coded value. And if you go to the documentation, you can find some entry about variables in the documentation. So variable in pipeline. So you'll find different type of variable you can use. So system variables that are provided by Codefresh shows the name of the pipeline, the repo name coming from the trigger, your account, and so on. So there is a full list. Then we will have some context-related variable. I'll talk about that for the next step. And then you have variable related to the step, like the result of a step, and so on. And then you have some specific variable to each of the providers. So, some GitHub variable or some pull request for GitHub or some Git variable and so on. And of course, you can define your own variable as we've seen for the project at the trigger, where we created the service one, and additional one you can create it. So that's the different variable. And as you can see for the syntax, the variable are used using the double curly bracket, to encapsulate the name. So those 2 are coming from the trigger. Same with the CF branch. The name of my integration, so in this case Git, because I'm doing a Git clone, is GitHub, and then the stage that I want to put that particular step in. So that's my Git clone step. And then we have the build step. So the build is to create a Docker image. So the type is build, and then the image name I want to create it is, so my Docker organization, and then the name of my image is going to be the name of the service. So I created the service variable, and then I'm going to do a prefix. So service demo. And so depending on what trigger is used, it's going to become vote demo or result demo. Then here, I'm going to access my Docker file to build my image. So the Docker file, if you remember, is in the subfolder. So it's in the either in the vote or the result subfolder or the worker. So basically the name of the service. So let's use a service variable. And the clone here, that what I was referencing in the variable page as context variables. So the clone here reference to that step. So Codefresh has a couple of those context-related variables, and one is based on the clone. So the directory where the git clone happens basically end up in that variables. So that's what's happening. So for the build, you can tag your image, but I don't really like that branch name. So I'm going to create a version variable, and I'm going to go add it into my variable version. And let's say I want to create the version 3.0.0. And if I wanted that value to be hidden, encrypted, I could basically click on that little log to encrypt the variable, and people would not be able to see its value in the UI or in the log. Okay, so I'm going to build my image, the Docker file in that subfolder, and I'm building into build. Let's remove the test for now. And the third step I wanted to talk about was a push step. So by default, the build step will push that image to the registry. And in fact, I forgot to add the registry. That's the error I was seeing. So the registry was named Docker in my integration. So as I said, the third step I want to talk about is a push. So it's basically to push an image, also add additional tag. So you can either type your code directly if you know what to add, but you can also come to that step tab here and basically search or marketplace for different steps we provide for you, as well as the steps that your organization has created for you that you may have access to. So let's go to the marketplace and look at that push one. So here I have push image, and I can click on it, and it's give me basically some example. Some step have multiple example. I'll show you that in a second. So let's copy the step, and let's copy it here. Oops, I don't know. Okay. And as you can see here, my indenting is not correct. So you can, of course, come to each line and add 2 spaces by hand, but it's very annoying. So we have a shortcut. If you do command closing square bracket, you will move your code 2 spaces to the right. If you use command opening square bracket, you'll come to the right, to the left, sorry. And the last one is the command slash that allow you to comment a block. And you can also do the same by using that little button here to comment the stuff. So here my step is push. So let's add a title. So push to Docker. So my argument is the candidate. So the candidate, it's another one of those context variables. So in this case, I want to push the image that was created into the build step. So I'm going to use the name of the step, which is build. And that way it's going to be able to use the image created here. For the tag, I want the same thing, but I could add additional tags. So as a matter of fact, let's do that. So here I can have an array as well, and I want latest and version. And the image name is going to be the same that I have here. So let's do that. Oops. And my registry, again here, because I'm pushing to Docker, is going to be Docker. So why do we have an error on line 32? Oh, it's because I messed up the indentation. So okay, title, if I can spell correctly, that's better. But as you can see, the link is very useful because it tells me I have an error. Now my step should be good. So let's save it. So now we have a basic pipeline. Let's run it. So obviously you click on run. So as the pipeline has some trigger, I need to select one, else my variable coming from Git would not be basically filled. I would not have any value and my pipeline would fail. So here let's pick, the vote one. It doesn't really matter. The branch is master. I can eventually change my variable, like, the version and the service and so on. But, for now, let's do just a simple one. So my pipeline is started. As you can see, I have my stages. And as you can see here, I forgot to add one for my push stage, so it end up in default. But the step will still be run into the order I gave them. In addition, you can see at the top some information: what's the name of my pipeline, what repo it's coming from, who started the pipeline. Because I simulated the trigger, the webhook from Git, I get the last, commit, when it was started, the status, where I'm running it. It looks like I forgot to change it, so I'm running on my runtime environment, on my own cluster, and so on. And at the start of the pipeline, there is a bunch of action happening, behind the scene. A pod is initiated to run the pipeline. A volume is created, and that's a good time to talk about volume. So let's do that. So if you're familiar with Docker container, you know that each Docker container has its own, basically, disk attached to it. And if you remember how I set up my pipeline, my first step was running on its own image and was doing a git clone. And then the build was running on a different image. But I was building basically the content that I had downloaded in the previous step. And this is possible because behind the scene, Codefresh add a volume to your pipeline, and that volume is automatically mounted on each container as a step is running. So when you do something in step 1, then it's going to be available in step 2, and each step can, read and write. So for example, if I do some npm command, then it's going to install the module into the Codefresh volume. And then when I run my test command, my modules are going to be there. So in our case, the first one was the git clone, so I was downloading the code, and then with the Docker, it has access to the to the code and the Docker file and so on. The other advantage of that is volume can be reused. So it's mean the next time I'm going to run my pipeline, assuming the volume has not been deleted because it has been, too long, or because it has been used by another execution of the same pipeline. But basically, if it's avoidable, the system is going to mount it for me. And it's mean, for example, if you download some, dependency because you're doing a Maven build or something like that, those dependencies are going to be here. So your pipeline is going to run faster because it doesn't have to download everything again. The same happen with a different layer for your images. They're going to be on that volume. The same thing for the images you're using. They're going to be eventually already there. So by reusing the same volume, you should expect some serious improvement in terms of performance. So now that it's clear, let's go back to our pipeline. So as you can see, the clone happened, and now it's running the build, and the push will happen after, despite the order here not being slightly correct. But the order of the step is correct. So let's go look at my step. So I have the output, which is a normal, standard output and standard error of, what's happened. I can also see the YAML of my step. And then here I'm doing an image. So the same thing, the image is being constructed as we speak. I got some warning, but nothing serious. And so the image is being built, and I have access to, eventually some matrix on, how much CPU or some memory I'm using, and so on. The build tree is a feature that allows you, when you have pipeline calling other pipeline, to see that dependency graph. There is another video on the channel on that specific feature, so go have a look if you're interested. And state, it's a way to see, the different variable you have, and you modified, and so on. So here my image was built, and then I push it to Docker. And as you can see now, I have a 3.0 image push to Docker. So let's fix that, because that was not very pretty. So let's change the stage that was missing in that particular example. As you can see, the stage is not compulsory. So stage is going to be push. So the next run will be correct. Why don't I? Oh, I don't have a stage push. So let's add push stage. Okay, now it's correct. Let's make a couple of changes to this pipeline and add some freestyle steps to make it a little better. So the first thing I want to change is the variable, because here the variable is static. So it's mean if I run this 10 times, I'm going to rebuild the same image version all the time, which is not very realistic. Typically you would want to either pick a file from the repository, or in this case, we're just going to use the time of the day to get the variable. So let me do a copy paste. So I'm going to add a step here. Let's indent it properly. And I'm going to add an init stage. So here I'm creating a variable using CF export. CF export is very akin to the export in Linux. It's basically create a variable with a value and have that variable accessible in any of the steps following this one. So now I'm creating a version. Dynamically, I can remove that one. So now I don't have a variable. The other thing I want to do is I don't want to push my image as soon as it builds. By default, the build automatically push the image. So I'm going to change that by disabling the push, which happen by default. So I'm going to say disable push. So instead, I want to add some tests, and if those tests run and pass, then I will push my image. Typically, in a more real use case, your test would use the image, but here for time's sake, I'm just going to use a basic script that in my repo. So I'm going to add it here. Again, I need to indent it properly, and now I have a stage test before push. So I'm going to add my stage. So it's going to run some test. And the other thing I want to do, because I was running on my runtime environment, which is not in my case very performant, I'm going to change to the SaaS option. So if I go to build runtime, I'm going to say run on cloud builds, and small should be plenty for what I'm doing. So I'm saving, and then I can run. Okay, so as you can see, I have my different stages, and it's going to run. So let's speed up through that section. So the pipeline has progressed, the build happened, I run my test. In this case, 86%, it's a pass. Then I can push my image to Docker. And here we go. Now our pipeline is running. Let's have a look at one of my favorite features, the debug mode. So when you run a pipeline, you have the ability to run it into a debug mode. So let's restart from scratch. So it gives you the ability in the UI to add breakpoint before, after, or in the middle of the image. So let's do one here and one after here. So, and once you've set your breakpoint, you can continue your pipeline. So when you use a freestyle step, you have the ability to be dropped in your image, and it gives you a couple of ability, like looking at the environment variable. What did I click? Oops. I was not in the window. So I can look at my environment variable, like my pipeline name and stuff like that. And I can run exactly the same command that I would if I were into the image. And to prove I am in that image, if you remember, my image was Codefresh CLI. So let me copy my my command. But oops, if we go to the debugger, as we're in the Codefresh image, I should be able to do a Codefresh command. So let's look at the help page. And it's give me the CLI help page. So it's really dropped me into the command, the image I wanted. And now I can run the same command. So it's a lot easier than to do some, for computer using some kind of, remote execution, and you have to drop into it, or, you can run it manually and stuff like that. But I am not in the same environment if I run my image from my system, by doing a Docker run or stuff like that, because the disk won't be the same, my disk won't be mounted, maybe the variable are not present, versus here I am really in my execution context. So now let me execute my command. So now I'm executing my SCF export on my version, and I can continue my pipeline either by clicking on the continue or by exiting in the shell here. So I'm continuing, and while it's continuing, let's go look at my initialization on what happened. So as I say, that's where you can see what's happening as the pipeline is starting to run. The pod here initializing, the volume is created. And in this case, because I was building the same pipeline than the time before, the system is clever enough to basically give me the same volume again. And then it switch me to the debugger. So here what I wanted to show you is I have a pipeline, I have a breakpoint after the clone. So if I do an ls, you can see that my repo was basically cloned, and I can go down in and tabulation works. And I can see basically what I have. So that's the advantage of the debug mode. You can look at the code as your environment variable. You can even run the command for a freestyle step. So that gives you a lot of freedom to explore and see where you may have a problem. So as I was saying here, my volume was basically reused from the previous execution. So let's stop that particular execution. Let's look at a parallel step. So in this case, instead of just pushing to Docker, I want to push to Docker and Quay, and doing at the same time to speed up the process. So let's remove that one and add a parallel step. So as you can see now, my type is parallel. I'm still in my push stage. And then under parallel, I'm basically creating two sub-steps. One to push to Docker, so basically the same than before. My registry is Docker. My type is push, and I'm pushing the latest in the version. And my image name is the same. And the same for Quay. So let's run that. As you can see, now for my parallel step, I have a slight indentation that basically indicate to me that my two steps are in parallel, and there is also this little icon that show me it's basically parallel step. As you can see, each step has eventually a little icon to give you a quick view of what it is. So the Docker is to push, the freestyle is kind of the bash, and so on. And you can see now the two steps are running in parallel. The blue is to indicate, parallelism. I mean, to indicate in the execution. And one is finished, and I assume it's because the image was already pushed and there was nothing ready to, to push. All the layers were there, and now, Quay has been pushed as well. So that was great, but as you can see, there is a lot of duplicate code if we look at it. Everything is kind of the same. All the fields are different. The only difference is really my registry name and my title to reflect that. So fortunately, Codefresh offers kind of a shortened version of the parallel when you want to do the same kind of stuff. And it's what we called scale syntax. So let me remove, let's comment it so we can compare more easily. And I'm going to add a new push step using that scale syntax. So, and let's indent it. Oops. As you can see now, my step is a type push, and then in the first part, I'm putting all the common code. So my stage, my candidate, coming from the build, all the tag, the image name, and then in the scale part, I'm putting basically, the same sub-step that's going to run in parallel, basically the part that is different. So the registry and my title. That list doesn't need to be the same in each of the sub-steps. You could add additional tags here, for example, or add other field depending on what you're trying to do. And that's the syntax. So as you can see, it's a little shorter. It's make it easier to write. In case you have more than one dimension, Docker and Quay, like you want to build something with different version on different platform, we have a similar syntax with a matrix keyword, so you can go look in the documentation. So let's run it, and it should look very similar. I have my two push being here, done in parallel. Okay, and now the push is happening again in parallel. And if you look at the code, as you can see, it's basically my type push. It has been expanded for you, just a shortcut. Let's look at the conditional execution of some steps. So you have different way of running a step on some condition, and everything is documented. So you can do it on a on a branch value, on a variable value, on the presence of a variable or not, and you can also use some function to have a little more leeway in your condition. And of course, your condition can be all of them or any of them, kind of an and or. So let's add some condition in our pipeline. So I want to push, for example, only if I'm on the master branch. So the way you do that is you simply add a when condition. So let's add it here, it doesn't matter where it is. So when I'm on branch master, then I'm going to push. If I am not, I'm not going to push. So let's change it because that's the default branch where my trigger is. So let's put it on branch foo, and that step should be skipped. So let's run, and I'm going to pause until then to speed up a little. Okay, now my test is running. And as you can see, the step is grayed out, it has been skipped. And if we look into the log, you can see the name didn't match my condition. I was checking for branch foo, and it says it's no match, so the step was skipped. Finally, let's look on how to send a Slack notification when your pipeline fails. So there is a mechanism called hook in Codefresh that allows you to execute some additional step, either at the end or the start of a pipeline or a step, if it was failure or success or stuff like that. So let's add one for failure on my pipeline, but I could add it at the end of a step. So here what I'm doing is I'm adding a hook on failure, and when it's failing, I'm going to send a notification to Slack to myself by using some message using variables, so the name of my pipeline and the URL, so I can click on it and go directly there. As you can see, I need to use a Slack token variable, but it's not defined in my account. But there is a way to create variable, as mentioned already, at the project level, at the pipeline level, but you can also create them at the account level by going into the setting. You need to be admin again, and so if you go into the shared configuration, you can create variables and encrypted variables. So here, that's what I did. I created a training group where I have only one variable, which is my Slack token, so you cannot see it because it's encrypted. So if I go back to my pipeline and I go to my variables, if I click on the ellipsis here, I can add shared configuration, and I can add the training shared configuration. And now it is here. So I can close that, I can save. And to save a little bit of time, I'm going to add a step that basically forces a failure on my pipeline because I'm not sure my test is going to fail, on demand. So let's add as my first step, basically a step that does a non-zero exit code. So that's going to force an error. Okay, so let's run that puppy. Okay, so this step should fail and return me a non-zero exit code and should show as red. Okay, so here we're going through the init phase. My step is running. Took exit 1, I have an error as expected, and then the hook is going to be called, and in order to see the log of the hook, you have to go into the initialization box here. And it's executing post hooks, it has been sent, and now if I bring my Slack, you can see my CI build for Codefresh 101 build has failed, and if I click on that link, as you can see, the number here is the same than I have here, the number is the same. So that's how you can send a notification in Slack, or you could do it with email. We have an SMTP step, at the end of your pipeline because it succeeded or it failed or whatever you need to do. So this concludes our video for today. I hope it was very useful. If you have any comment, please leave them under the video or reach out to us. Thank you very much.